Welcome to the Modern Taoist with Kip Man. Ancient wisdom, modern life, and the way. Join the free Modern Taoist community on Patreon at patreon.com/themoderntaoist or visit the website at dawananda.com. And now, the Modern Taoist.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Modern Taoist. My name is Kip Man, and I hope that you are having a fine day wherever you may be. However you may be listening, I appreciate you being here. Don't forget, like she said, to follow us over and join us on Patreon. By the way, if you are listening to this on Spotify, and of course this applies everywhere, but specifically on Spotify, as a good Taoist, I really don't pay attention to the analytics or care about the results of our little podcast here. But there are people that do, and that care about these numbers and such. I was told that for the amount of listeners we have, we are really short on our followers. And I don't really know what that means, but I am told that the more followers we have, the easier it is for people to find us. So I appreciate all of the listeners. We have so many in 111 countries, and it's just growing all the time. But apparently we're lagging behind on our followers count. So for what that's worth, if you are on Spotify, if you could click the little follow button, that would apparently be super helpful. And I'm not I'm not a dumb guy. I'm not one of these people that doesn't understand stuff. I just don't think about it. I don't think about the analytics of it. So I always forget to tell you to follow. It's just a thing. We've had some really interesting conversations over on the Patreon page, by the way. patreon.com/themoderntaoist. And one of the things that has come up quite a bit lately is people finding themselves in what I would probably call dramatic situations where it's outside the norm. Something bad happens to the extreme. And sometimes when something happens, it doesn't really matter what exactly. The details are going to change, but the structure is always the same. A relationship ends, a job disappears, or has, become just untenable. Conversations with somebody goes completely off the rails and leaves like a really nasty aftertaste. A plan falls through. A person you counted on isn't there when you need them. Something in your body starts behaving in ways that require attention. Your finances go belly up. And that immediate experience, in almost every case, is that the situation is the problem, right? That what is happening out there in the world, in the relationship or the circumstances, is the thing that needs to change before anything else can. So we tell ourselves, I'm having money problems right now, and once that gets fixed, I'll find a way forward. Or my wife left me, and I'm dealing with all of that. Once I sort that out, I'll find a way forward. And the way forward runs through the situation resolving itself. And until it does, you're kind of stuck, held in place. This is one of the most universal experiences of being a human. And it is also, in the Taoist way of things, one of the most reliable ways to misunderstand where your life is actually taking place. Because the situation, whatever it is not actually what's going on. Your life is happening in response to the situation, in the way that you meet the situation, in what you reach for when things go wrong, and how long you hold on to things that need to be put down, and in whether you contract around difficulty or find somewhere in the middle of it a quality of steadiness that the circumstances itself cannot provide and cannot take away is available to you. So, as we talk about this today, I want you to understand this is not an instruction on how to be unbothered by things that probably should bother you. Or it's not a way to pretend that circumstances don't matter. Okay? It's a little more focused than that, a little more precise. It is the recognition that two people can move through the same situation and arrive in entirely different places. And not because the circumstances differed, but because their response to the circumstance differed. And the response is something a person can actually work with. Because the response to the situation, not the situation, is what we have control over. So, when something difficult happens, your mind immediately begins telling you a story about it. There is nothing wrong with this. This is not a personality flaw. This is what minds do. They take raw experience and they organize it into a narrative. Because narratives are how human beings make sense of things that are happening. A narrative answers the questions that the situation raises. What does this mean? Why does this happen? What kind of person does this make me? What am I supposed to do now? So the problem is not the narrative. It's not that there is a story being told. The problem is a couple of fold here. How quickly it gets told and how completely, are you ready? It gets believed. The stories that form in our minds in the aftermath of something difficult are shaped by the emotional state that we are in. And the emotional state of a person who has just had something go wrong is at its most inaccurate. Like my teacher used to say, everybody can be a Taoist when the day is good. Right? When things go bad, that is when people really tend to fall off the path. Fear makes a situation look more permanent than it is. Anger makes it look more purposeful, more deliberate. Shame makes it look more revealing. And grief can make it look more final. And the story formed in any of these states carries distortion. It carries it into everything that follows, into the decisions, the responses, the interpretations of events, and unfortunately, because we are humans, into a prediction of what will happen next. And this is where the response begins to determine our way forward. The story gets formed in the first few hours after something goes wrong. And unfortunately, that few hours begins to frame everything that follows next. If we build a story that says this always happens to me, or the next event will be bad, then it most likely will be. If the story says I'm not somebody who recovers from things like that, then the recovery becomes harder. The story is not just describing reality, it is participating in the production of the outcome. Taoism's interest in this is not therapeutic, okay? Taoism is not concerned with helping people feel better about the situation. Taoism is concerned with the accuracy of how we view the situation, which in turn may make you feel better about it. We always look for the next level down, right? Feeling better about something is a surface. The accuracy of something is deeper. Taoism is interested in seeing what is actually there rather than the emotional storm of a bad moment. Chapter 16 of the Tao Te Ching describes the practice of returning. We've talked about this many times. Settling back to the root. Seeing at things from stillness rather than the middle of the storm. And this is not meant as a way to escape difficulty, but as a way to see clearly how to respond. The situation is always just the situation. It is the definition of it is what it is. A storm is always just a storm. What transforms the situation into a story, and remember, what is a story typically? It's fiction with villain and victims, implications and predictions, verdicts about what things mean and who you are. And because the response is a story, this is where transformation happens. It's also where the possibility of different outcomes live. So, let's take two people who are laid off from work. Same job, same company, same day, same circumstances. One of these people spends the following weeks in a contracted state. The loss confirms something they feared about themselves. I'm just not good enough. I knew it would be me. Closes down the sense of what is possible. I'm never going to find another job. Produces a search for another job that is half-hearted because the story says it doesn't matter, it's not going to work out anyway. The other person that got fired on that exact same day spends the weeks in a different place. They view the loss as releasing them from something that wasn't right, opening up space they hadn't known they needed, producing a search for the next job that carries the energy of someone who has decided, not naively, but deliberately, that what comes next is yet to be determined, and I'm going to go with the flow. Same exact situation, different stories, different ways forward. Not because one person is stronger or more evolved or more disciplined, but because the response was different. And the response was different because somewhere in the gap between what happened and what they did with it, a choice was made. Or wasn't made. When we make a choice, we make a choice. When a choice is not made, we have still made a choice, but the details are filled in automatically. Now, it's important that we understand that response is not the same thing as reaction. It sounds simple, but really, it's one of the most consequential differences that we have. A reaction is immediate and automatic. It is our emotional system doing what it is designed to do. Assess a situation, generate a feeling, producing a behavior. A reaction is fast because speed is the point. The nervous system evolved in conditions where wrong reactions to a threat were more costly than imperfect reactions. So it defaults to immediate, feeling-driven behavior in the presence of anything that registers as a negative. The difficulty of modern life is almost never the kind of difficulty that speed will help with. Financial pressures, relationship strains, professional setbacks, these are all situations where fast, automatic, feeling-driven responses are almost always making things worse. They make us say sharp things in anger, withdrawal when we should be opening, creating distance that becomes later hard to close. Decisions made from panic foreclose options that would have been available if we'd have just paused. A response is different than a reaction. It involves the same feelings. The response is not the suppression or denial of reaction, which that's not it. But it involves a pause between the feeling that we experience and the next set of behaviors. However small that gap is important. Because a gap in which something other than the automatic can occur is almost always going to make things better. Because it allows us to ask ourselves, what does this situation actually need? Rather than, how do I actually feel about it? The capacity to find the space between what arrives and how you respond to it, and how we act from that space, is what Taoism points at when it talks about the sage who responds without contention, who moves without forcing, who accomplishes without the kind of effort that produces resistance. Most people have experienced this in very small ways without really having any formal Taoist practice. The moment where you feel the sharp response rising and choose, for whatever reason, to back off, say something different. And then they watch that conversation go somewhere better than it would have gone had they been snappy McSnap. People that hold on to a decision for a day before making one, or who get ready to do something knee-jerk and pause and wait. Situations that look catastrophic on a Wednesday are way more manageable on the next Friday. Not because anything changed. The situation is still exactly the same. But the emotional weather system has passed. That's not an accident. That is the gap between reaction and response. And the question is, how do we widen that gap? How do we make it more reliable, where we can access it more deliberately? There's something else that the response makes possible that the reaction cannot. The reaction is always responding to the situation from an emotional place. Always. When I say always, I mean literally every time. The person who was left reacts to the partner's... let me back up a little bit. If a person who has been left, ghosted, let's pretend it's a relationship and somebody ghosted you, okay? If that happens to you and it leaves a bruise on your psyche, the next time someone is just a little bit later than they said they would be, you immediately start feeling that sense of impending abandonment. You can't help it. A person who gets criticized begins to react to feedback as attacks. These are emotional reactions. And it's important for you to understand that the pattern is almost always older than the situation, almost always larger than the situation. And you are responding to a pattern rather than the situation, or reacting, rather. So when we react, it is emotional. When we respond, it is intellectual. The response can respond to what is actually there, not the emotional pattern that was laid down before it, not to the fear of what might have been based on what has happened in the past. Response happens to the moment itself, to the circumstance right now. That capacity to see the situation as it is and not as the shadow of a previous situation is what Taoism helps you to accomplish. It is one of the things that Taoist practice is slowly, incrementally building in the person who takes the practice seriously. If you've been listening to this for, we're coming up on a year now, say you've been here for 4, 5, 6 months and you've listened to all the episodes, you may not realize it, but you are already building that capacity. And if you are new to Taoism and a lot of your reactions are emotional or knee-jerk, then you will get there. None of what I have said so far is tough to grasp, right? This is all easy, basic Taoism 101 stuff. The idea that response determines more than the situation is not obscure. It has appeared in many different episodes that we've done. It's all over Taoist wisdom traditions. It's all over modern psychology. It's all over the self-help section at Barnes & Noble. Okay? But in the moments that matter most people find it almost impossible to access without the emotional reaction. And this is where most personal development gets lost. Because almost all of us understand the principle. Understanding the principle does not produce the capacity. That has to be built over time. In low stakes moments, because when the high stakes moments arrive, there is either something real to draw on or there isn't. So you build in the low stakes moments. So that when a high stakes moment arrives, you have a wellspring of experience to go, okay, I know how to pause and consider rather than to emotionally react. The situations that make this the hardest are not big dramatic ones. Okay? Truly terrible moments, loss, crisis, these things tend to activate a quality of deliberateness almost easier than a more ordinary difficulty. People often surprise themselves in genuinely catastrophic moments. What they find harder are the situations that are chronic. Sustained difficulty that doesn't resolve, whether it's financial or a long illness or a bad relationship or a work situation that grinds you down. It may not be breaking you, but it is grinding you down. These are ordinary situations, and these situations are hard not because any single moment is unbearable, but because the accumulation erodes the capacity for response and forces reaction. I call these things chronic difficulties because they produce a state in which the emotional system is perpetually on alert, which makes accessing the gap between reaction and response almost so impossible to reach. The person who is worn down by a hard year of financial strife is not working with the same internal resources of the same person in a stable period. So telling them that the response determines the outcome is not really useful. It's an instruction without tools. So what Taoism offers is the understanding of why that capacity erodes and what restores it. The practice of returning, even briefly, finding stillness within the chronic situation, is the maintenance of your instrument. A person who cannot access stillness under any conditions cannot find the gap during bad conditions. You have to learn to do that when things are grand. A person who practices finding it in small ways in the moments of an ordinary day then has something to draw on when that difficulty is larger than the ordinary. The situations that erode the capacity most are not obviously difficult. Sometimes, most of the time, it's an accumulation of small things. So, what do we do? The shift from reaction to response is not achieved through just knowing there's a difference. It is a physical thing as much as anything else. Because the reaction will live in the physical body before it ever reaches your thought. And the gap has to be created at the level of the body before it can become available at the level of anything else. This is why Taoist practices of stillness and breath and the quality of attention, that's not nothing. It's not decorative. We don't do that for giggles, right? The stillness and breathing and the quality of right now attention is the mechanism of Taoism, a body that has learned through repeated experience to settle rather than to escalate, to find groundedness rather than immediately amplifying the activation. That is a body that creates the physical space to a response rather than a knee-jerk reaction. And it is not done through suppression. It's through a different relationship. So, in practical terms, this begins with your breath. Because your breath is one of the few things that we have that operates both automatically and voluntarily. The one system that the conscious mind can reach into and adjust. Right? Crazy Buddhist monks can control their blood pressure. You and I can't do that. We can't control our heart rate. We can't control muscle spasms. These three things occur during times of strife. What we can do is reach in and control our breath. When you find that your breath is being shortened and quickened by stress, deliberately slowing down, deepening the breath, produces a change that is scientifically measurable. We're not talking about something imaginary or metaphorical, theoretical. It is something that is scientifically proven to increase the gap. Because it creates in the body the beginnings of consideration. It continues with a question, not what should I do? That question asked too early produces reaction. The question is more simple. What is actually happening here, right now, underneath the story that my mind is beginning to concoct? What is the situation? Strip off the interpretation. What do I know for certain versus what am I assuming? Versus, even worse, what am I predicting based on what happened the last time something bad happened to me? Situations approached with that kind of honesty are almost always more bounded than the story about them, because they become more specific, more genuinely addressable. If you have a conversation that went wrong, involves specific things said between specific people in a specific context, that is not evidence of a permanent dynamic or a fixed pattern. That is simply one conversation. A financial difficulty involves specific numbers to a specific period. It is not a confirmation of a story about who you are and who you always will be with money. These are stories that we invent. These are stories we tell ourselves, sometimes so that it becomes someone else's fault. Sometimes it's self-deprecating. Sometimes it's an excuse. Sometimes it's a wall. Doesn't matter what it is. What matters is that it is a fiction with villains and victims. The situation seen without the story is always more workable than with it. The response becomes available from inside with an accurate view of the situation rather than from outside with an inaccurate story. Doesn't mean that the situation becomes easier. Doesn't mean the situation in it isn't hard. It does not mean the feelings aren't real or that the difficulty should be minimized. It means that the hard situation met with genuine attention rather than automatic reaction produces something other than fear and anger. Here's what this looks like across time. The person who has been building the gap slowly, learning through Taoist practice, finding the small moments, returning to it after losing it, making it a practice rather than an aspiration. You don't become someone who never reacts. You become someone whose reactions are less total, less consuming. Someone who can be in a difficult situation and retain a thread that leads back to themselves. A capacity to observe what is happening without feeling what is happening. It doesn't look like anything big. It is the difference between being swept and not being swept. You understand what I mean by that? Between the situation having you and you having the situation. The difference between how we handle the situation is very rarely has anything to do with the situation. Right? And when you learn through the course of small situations, learn to find that gap, learn to pause, learn to respond rather than react to the small things. When the big thing happens, you are way more prepared. Let's get on to our listener question for the day. This one comes to us from James in Kentucky. It says, Kid, I've been studying Taoism for about 2 years now, and the ideas make complete sense to me. But I find it almost impossible to actually live it. Because the moment something goes wrong, everything that I've learned goes out the window, and I'm back to reacting the way I always have. Why does something so intellectually obvious feel impossible to put into practice? James, buddy, you have just described the frustration of every serious Taoist student for the last 3,000 years. And honestly, probably every serious student of any tradition that is asking something of the person rather than just the intellect. Because at the end of the day, the intellect will find that most of this stuff makes all kinds of sense. It is the person that has a problem putting it into practice. You're not failing at this in any unusual way. You are in exactly the place that most people are in after 2 years of genuine Taoist engagement. The answer is simply this. Taoism makes sense because it describes things that at some level are already known. My teacher used to say to me all the time, probably the number one thing that sticks into my head, what he said to me over and over and over, I cannot teach you anything. You already know everything. I am simply showing you the road. The ideas resonate because they are pointing at something your mind already understands, but the intellectual understanding and the nervous system being able to access it are two completely different things. But they are both ways of knowing. And they have to be developed entirely differently than one another. What you are experiencing, the idea disappearing the moment the situation gets real, is not because you don't understand. It is because it is the feedback of a system that has been developed at the level of ideas, but not yet at the level where it matters most, which goes back to what we talked about in this episode. The difference between reaction and responding. The practice that changes this is not more reading. It is not more what Taoist book can I input into my system today. It is repeated practice of finding the gap between stimulus and response. Every single time you notice a small reaction rising and pause, even for a breath, you are building the thing. You're not building the understanding of it. You already have that. You're building the pathway that makes it available under pressure. The pathway is built through repetition in the moments of an ordinary day. That is not the idea of Taoism. That is Taoism. And I'm saying this not meant to discourage you, but it does take a little longer than 2 years. And that's not to say you can't make strides. Everybody makes strides. I'm having a conversation right now. I won't say her name. I'm having a conversation right now in private guidance sessions. She's made tremendous strides in the last 2 weeks. Tremendous. But when something very dramatic happens, she's probably going to backslide a little bit. That is completely normal. Because what we're doing is building. We are building. Taoism doesn't make situations change. It fixes our response. So your Taoist assignment for this week. In the next few days, something will activate you. Something small. And before you respond, I want you to stop for the length of one slow breath. Just 3 measly seconds. And I don't want you to worry about suppressing what you're feeling or performing patience. I just want you to begin to create the smallest gap between what activated you and what you do next. Can be anything. Someone cuts you off in traffic 3 seconds before you flip them off. Ask yourself, briefly and honestly, what is the situation here? And what am I feeling the urge to add to it in story form? You don't have to resolve anything but the answer. You don't have to produce a measured response. Go ahead and flip them off if you want to. You're not trying to become someone different in one single moment. You are practicing finding the gap. Because the gap will become larger and larger and larger the more you practice. The capacity to meet what arrives from somewhere that is less automatic. That, my friends, is the entire practice. So as we close for today, remember the situations will keep coming. There is no version of life in which difficult things stop happening. There is no version of life in which unexpected things stop showing up in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon. There is no version of life where the people and the circumstances you counted on will fail you. But these situations are not going to become more manageable on their own. What can change and what you can control is the quality of how you meet them. The capacity to be in a hard situation without being consumed by it. To find in the middle of something difficult a breadcrumb back to a steadier version of yourself. To respond from a place rather than reacting from one. Rather than letting the automatic machinery of your nervous system take control. And that is built through practice. Every small gap. Every moment of genuine attention brought to what is happening rather than the story that your brain is concocting. Across time, it will change. The situation is not where your life is occurring. The response is. And the response, unlike the situation, is something you can control. And if this one found you at the right time, pass it on to somebody that needs to hear it. Please don't forget to follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you have questions, feel free to send them in. If you're interested in some private guidance sessions, those are available on the website, daoananda.org. That's DAOANANDA.org or .com. And until next time, I thank you for joining us on The Modern Taoist.
Thanks for listening to The Modern Taoist with Kit Man. Join the free Patreon community at patreon.com/The Modern Taoist and subscribe to the podcast for new episodes every Tuesday and weekend Taoism check-ins every Friday. Visit the website at daoananda.com and don't forget to like and follow us on whatever platform you find us.